I was too small, and yet God chose me. If today the world remembers me as the little flower, there is something I want to tell you that many people never imagine when they hear my name. Many think that saints are born strong, brave, almost perfect from the beginning, but that was not my story. I was not born strong. I was not born fearless. And I certainly was not born a great saint. The truth is that many times I was too sensitive, too fragile, and far too small for everything that God seemed to ask of me. There were moments when a single word could make me cry, moments when sadness felt heavier than my heart could carry. And yet, strangely enough, it was precisely in that weakness that God began to do something extraordinary. Because God has a mysterious way of working. He takes what the world considers fragile, insignificant, or too small and transforms it into a path that can touch millions of souls. But to understand how my story truly began, you must travel back with me to France, to the year 1873, to a quiet little town called Alencon. It was there, on January 2nd of that year, that I was born. My parents, Louis Martin and Zélie Martin, were not ordinary people. Long before they met each other, both of them had dreamed of giving their lives completely to God. My father once tried to enter a monastery, and my mother had hoped to become a nun. But God had something different in mind for them. Instead of calling them to religious life, He called them to something just as sacred, building a family centered entirely on faith. In our home, faith was not something reserved for Sundays. It was woven into every part of daily life. Prayer, sacrifice, trust in God, these were as natural to us as breathing. Yet, even in a home so full of faith, suffering did not stay far away. My parents had 9 children, but 4 of them died when they were still very young. Those losses shaped our family in ways that are difficult to explain. My parents understood something very deeply. Every child is a gift from God, and every moment together is a grace that can never be taken for granted. During my earliest years, however, my world was filled with warmth and tenderness. At the center of that world was my mother. Zélie Martin was a remarkable woman, strong, hardworking, and deeply loving. She ran a lace-making business that helped support our family, yet she never allowed work to replace what mattered most, God and her children. To me, she was everything. When you are a child, your mother is your safety, your comfort, your entire world. And I believed, with the innocent certainty of a little girl, that she would always be there. But my childhood would soon learn a painful truth. Sometimes God allows the deepest love to be touched by sorrow. When I was only 4 years old, my mother became gravely ill with breast cancer. At first, I did not understand what was happening. I only noticed that something had changed in our home. The conversations between adults became quieter. I sometimes saw tears that quickly disappeared when I walked into the room. There was a heaviness in the air that even a small child could feel. Little by little, the truth became impossible to ignore. My mother was dying. One memory from that time has remained with me all my life. My mother held me in her arms with a tenderness that felt deeper than usual, almost as if she were trying to give me in that single embrace all the love she would no longer be able to give in the years ahead. Not long after that moment, she died. She was 45 years old. I was only 4. That loss changed my heart forever. People often say that children forget pain quickly, but I did not forget. The death of my mother left me with a sensitivity that shaped the rest of my childhood. I cried easily. I clung deeply to the people I loved. The thought of losing someone again filled me with fear. Yet even in that sorrow, God quietly placed someone in my life who would help heal my wounded heart. My older sister, Pauline Martin, began caring for me with extraordinary tenderness. Over time, Pauline became far more than a sister to me. She became almost like a second mother. She comforted me when I cried, spoke to me about Jesus, and helped me discover that prayer could be as simple as speaking to God like a child speaks to a loving father. Through Pauline, a new desire slowly began to grow in my heart. As she spoke about God, heaven, and the saints, I started to feel something stirring deep within me. Even as a young girl, I remember thinking something that seemed almost impossible for someone so small. I wanted to become a saint. But at that time, I did not truly understand what that meant. And soon, another event would shake my heart again. When I was 9 years old, Pauline made a decision that would once more change my life. She felt called to enter the convent of the Carmelite nuns, part of the Carmelite order. When I heard the news, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Pauline was not only my sister, she was the one who had filled the emptiness left by my mother. The thought of losing her too felt unbearable. I still remember the day we accompanied her to the convent. As I watched her walk through the doors that would separate her from the world, my heart felt as if it were breaking all over again. In that moment, a question rose silently inside me, a question that many souls have asked throughout history. Why does God allow us to lose the people we love the most? Yet something unexpected began to happen within me as time passed. The pain did not disappear, but it slowly began to change. A quiet thought started growing inside my heart. If Pauline could give her entire life to God, perhaps one day I could do the same. The problem was that I knew myself too well. I knew how sensitive I was, how easily I cried, how quickly my heart could be wounded by even small things. I often felt that I was far too weak to do anything truly great for God. What I did not yet understand was that my weakness was not an obstacle in God's plan. It was the very place where His plan would begin. Because God was not preparing me for the path of heroes, great missionaries, or famous preachers. Instead, He was preparing something completely different, a path where holiness would not be measured by extraordinary achievements, but by love hidden in the smallest actions. But before I would discover that path, my soul would pass through a mysterious trial that no one in my family could fully understand. A strange illness would take hold of me, filling my heart with fear and darkness, and everything would change one night. When I looked at a statue of the Virgin Mary, what happened in that moment was something no one could explain, and it would become the first miracle of my life. But that is where the next chapter of my story begins. After my sister, Pauline Martin, entered the convent, something inside me began to unravel in a way that my family could not fully understand. Outwardly, I was still the same child, but inwardly, my heart had become fragile, almost painfully so. Losing my mother had already wounded me deeply, and now Pauline, the one who had comforted me through that loss, was gone behind the walls of the Carmelite convent. It felt as though the world I knew was slowly being taken away from me. At first, the sadness seemed ordinary, the kind that comes when someone you love leaves. But little by little, it grew into something darker. I became anxious, easily frightened, and strangely overwhelmed by emotions that I could not control. My family began to notice that something was not right. I cried often, and sometimes without any clear reason. My heart felt restless, as if it were trapped in a storm that no one else could see. Soon my condition grew so mysterious that even doctors could not explain it. Some thought it was a physical illness. Others believed it was simply the grief of a sensitive child. But the truth is that I felt as though my soul itself was suffering. Fear would suddenly seize me without warning. At night, I struggled to find peace. And the more my family tried to help me, the more helpless they felt. Those weeks were some of the most confusing moments of my childhood. I was surrounded by love, yet I felt lost inside my own heart. It was as if God, who had once seemed so close in the prayers Pauline had taught me, had suddenly become distant. Then one evening, something happened that would remain with me for the rest of my life. I was lying in bed in our home in Lisieux, weak and exhausted from the strange illness that had taken hold of me. In my room, there was a statue of the Virgin Mary, placed there by my family as a reminder of her protection. I have looked at that statue many times before, but that night something was different. As I gazed at the face of the Blessed Mother, suddenly it seemed to come alive with an expression I had never seen before. She smiled. It was not the imagination of a frightened child. The smile was gentle, tender, and filled with a love that seemed to reach directly into my wounded heart. In that moment, all the fear that had tormented me simply disappeared. A peace flooded my soul so suddenly and so completely that even my family could see the change. The illness that had troubled everyone vanished as mysteriously as it had come. Later, when people asked me what had happened, I could only describe it in the simplest way. The Virgin Mary had looked at me with a mother's love, and in that smile, I felt that heaven itself had touched my life. Yet even that miracle did not mean that my struggles were over. In fact, the next lesson God wanted to teach me would be even more surprising. You see, despite the healing I experienced that night, my personality was still painfully sensitive. I loved deeply, but I was also easily hurt. The smallest correction could make me cry. I often felt ashamed of how weak I seemed compared to others. Deep inside, I still wondered if someone like me could ever truly belong to God. Then came the night that changed everything. It was Christmas Eve in 1886, and our family had gathered as we always did. In France, there was a simple tradition in our home. After midnight mass, small gifts were placed in the shoes that we children left near the fireplace. It was a joyful custom that had always filled me with excitement, but that year something happened that almost shattered the moment. As my sister and I quietly prepared to go to the living room, I overheard my father, Louis Martin, speaking in a tired voice. Thinking that I could not hear him, he said something that pierced my heart. He wondered if perhaps this childish tradition should finally end, since I was growing older. For a moment, I felt the familiar wave of sensitivity rising inside me, the kind of sadness that would normally make me burst into tears. In the past, that single comment would have ruined the entire evening for me. But that night, something different happened. In an instant so quickly that I can still hardly explain it, I felt a strength enter my soul. Instead of giving in to tears, I chose to smile. I walked into the room with joy, opened my gifts happily, and acted as if nothing had hurt me. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like a very small moment, but inside my heart, something extraordinary had taken place. It was as if God had given me the grace to step outside my own sensitivity and begin loving others instead of focusing on my wounded feelings. That night, I later realized, marked the end of the fragile childhood that had once dominated my life. From that moment forward, my soul began to grow rapidly in ways that surprised even me. And with that new strength came a decision that would shock everyone around me. The desire to give my life entirely to God, something that had quietly lived in my heart since childhood, suddenly became urgent and undeniable. I no longer wanted to wait for adulthood or for some distant future. I wanted to enter the Carmelite convent. There was only one problem. I was 15 years old. At that time, no one my age was allowed to enter the convent so young. Every door seemed closed, every authority seemed certain that I was simply too young. But my heart would not let go of the call I felt. And that determination would lead me to do something that very few young girls had ever dared to do. I would travel to Rome and ask the Pope himself for permission. That moment standing before Pope Leo XIII and begging him to let me enter the convent would become one of the boldest decisions of my life. But that story belongs to the next chapter. The desire to give my life completely to God had grown so strong within me that I could no longer ignore it. I wanted to enter the Carmelite convent where my sister Pauline lived, to belong entirely to Jesus, to spend my life praying for souls. But there was a problem that seemed impossible to overcome. I was only 15 years old, and the rules of the convent did not allow someone so young to enter. My family tried to help, and many priests listened kindly to my request, but the answer remained the same everywhere I went: wait. They believed I was too young, too impulsive, too inexperienced to make such a serious decision. Yet deep in my heart, I felt something different. I knew with a certainty that I cannot fully explain that God was calling me now. Finally, an unexpected opportunity appeared. My father, Louis Martin, planned a pilgrimage to Rome, and I was allowed to accompany him. For me, this journey was not only a pilgrimage, it was my last hope. If the authorities in France would not allow me to enter the convent, perhaps I could appeal directly to the highest authority in the church. And so, in 1887, I found myself standing in a long line of pilgrims waiting to greet the Holy Father, Pope Leo XIII. The moment came quickly. Each pilgrim knelt, received a blessing, and moved on. But when my turn arrived, I did something that surprised everyone around me. Instead of leaving immediately, I gathered my courage and spoke. I asked the Pope to allow me to enter the Carmelite convent at 15. The attendants tried to move me away, but I refused to leave without speaking. The Holy Father looked at me with calm kindness and answered that if it was truly God's will, it would happen. Though it was not an immediate permission, those words filled my heart with hope. Soon after returning home, the door finally opened. At 15 years old, I entered the Carmelite convent in Lisieux. Many people imagine that entering a convent must have been the peaceful ending to my story. But in truth, it was only the beginning of a much deeper journey. Life in the Carmelite convent was hidden, silent, and often very ordinary. There were no grand adventures, no dramatic missions, no public sermons. My days were filled with prayer, small tasks, and community life with the other sisters. And yet it was there, in that hidden life, that God began to reveal something that would later be known as my little way. You see, when I looked at the saints, I often felt overwhelmed. They seemed like towering mountains of holiness, great missionaries, heroic martyrs, brilliant theologians. I felt too small to imitate them. My heart longed to love God greatly, but I knew I did not have the strength to perform extraordinary sacrifices. Then one day, I understood something that changed everything. If I could not do great things for God, I would do small things with great love. Instead of seeking heroic acts, I would offer the smallest moments of daily life, every smile, every hidden sacrifice, every act of patience as a gift to God. When a sister annoyed me, I would answer with kindness. When a task felt tedious, I would offer it with love. When suffering came, I would trust that even my weakness could be used by God. That simple path became what I called my little way, was a way of spiritual childhood, trusting God completely, like a small child trusts a loving father. But the final chapter of my life would test that trust more deeply than I ever expected. When I was only 24 years old, I became seriously ill with tuberculosis. The illness slowly weakened my body and filled my days with suffering. Breathing became difficult. Pain became constant. There were moments when the darkness seemed overwhelming. Yet something surprising happened during those final months. Even in suffering, my heart was filled with peace. I believed with complete certainty that love was stronger than death, and that even the smallest acts of love offered to God could echo through eternity. As my strength faded, I made a promise that I truly believed God would allow me to keep. I said that after my death, I would spend my heaven doing good on earth. I said that I would let fall a shower of roses graces from heaven for those who asked for help. On September 30th, 1897, as my life came to its end, I whispered my final words. My God, I love you. I was only 24 years old. Yet the story did not end there. Years later, my simple writings about the little way, published in a book called Story of a Soul, began to spread across the world. Millions of people discovered that holiness was not reserved for the extraordinary, but was possible in the small and hidden acts of everyday love. Eventually, the church recognized what God had done through my little life. In 1925, I was canonized as a saint, and years later, the church would even declare me a doctor of the church, a title given to those whose teaching helps guide the faith of millions. But if you ask me what my life truly meant, the answer is still very simple. I was small. I was weak. I was ordinary. And yet God showed the world that even the smallest soul can become great through love. So if you ever feel too small, too broken, or too ordinary to be used by God, remember my story. Because the path to heaven is not always found in great achievements. Sometimes it begins with something as small as a little flower,